So throughout the 19th century, German immigrants to Warsaw, Throughout the 19th century, German immigrants to Warsaw were active as factory founders, merchants, bankers, and publishers. Through various ways, they fostered the economic development of the city. Germans, Jewish and non-Jewish, and their descendants worked as artisans, as owners of counting houses, as industrial workers and day workers. A large group Germans were teachers and doctors. Besides, they were strongly represented in the judiciary. Many descendants of the German immigrants considered themselves as Poles and became members of a self-confident middle class. In 1882, 2 to 3% of the Warsawians were Germans. In spite of their small number, at the end of the century, entrepreneurs of German origin had a relatively strong presence in the class of the wealthiest citizens next to the Catholic Poles. This may be interpreted as an indication for their above-average economic success in industry, commerce, and banking, as well as for their economic integration. The census of 1882 showed that then nearly half of all the Warsawian Protestants worked as artisans and industrialists. About half of the Protestants were Germans, and 80% of the Germans were Protestants. So one can conclude that a very large part of Germans were artisans or industrialists. This indicates that the majority of the Germans made their careers in connection with the industrialization in the Warsaw region. My presentation proposes the thesis that the influence the Germans and their descendants had on the economic upswing resulted from the activities in those sectors of industry which played a key role in Warsaw's economic upturn. After the Third Partition, during the Prussian rule in the Duchy of Warsaw, Germans increasingly moved from Prussia to Warsaw. Many of them were Jews from Prussia and Silesia. Others immigrated from South Prussia, the Polish region under Prussian administration since 1795. The increased immigration of Jews to Warsaw was partly encouraged by a Prussian decree of 1797. It allowed Jews to take a residence in each district of Warsaw and to build. In 1799, these rights were limited to Jews who had been residents of Warsaw before 1796. Those who arrived later had to pay fees. Poor Jews generally were not welcomed. However, after the turn of the century, the number of Jewish inhabitants increased faster than the number of the non-Jewish. The group of Protestant immigrants from Germany was rather small. In 1810, after the Prussian officers had left Warsaw, 4% of all Warsawians were German Protestants. The minor size of the group of the German settlers leads to the question of their factual influence. Well, the paper is based on the thesis that the type of their activities and successes were an indicator for how they contributed to the upturn. The thesis is supported through the fact that the activities of most German immigrants met the actual needs of the evolving industry. From this perspective, it seems very likely that the rapid economic change and the needs of the industry created an incentive for immigration. The political transitions doubtlessly had another important influence as far as they had an impact on the economic and social development of Warsaw. Finally, the immigration policy of the rulers often encouraged the stay of individuals who seemed to be successful in the economic field. Besides, at the beginning of the 19th century, a job seeker could easily cross any border between Norway and France. The older historiography often emphasized that through the partitions, Warsaw's economy, especially the trade, had been significantly curtailed. On the other hand, under the changed conditions, Warsaw experienced an economic transition. In the whole, the local trade, agriculture, and branches of industry grew. Other important income sources came into being. the supplies for the Prussian army and the granting of credits. Thus, at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, a new type of mercantilist came up, so that the local business elite underwent a fundamental change. The new type was characterized by activity in various fields, in trade, in industry, and banking at the same time. There are hardly any records about the precise national structure of this class. It is recognized, though, that at the beginning of the 19th century, Jews, German and non-German, formed the largest group of the wealthy merchants and bankers. Among the immigrants were also French and few English and Italians. German-sounding surnames were no reliable evidence for German origin, as the Prussian administration in Warsaw had given the Jews new surnames. The financier Judita Levi-Jakubowiczowa, who was born in 1749, came to Warsaw from Frankfurt-Oder in the late 18th century. She spoke fluently German and French and belonged to the group of Jews who sympathized with the ideas of the Enlightenment. In 1806, she supplied the Prussian armies with corn and fodder, and during the period of the Duchy of Warsaw, her company was a major deliverer to the French and Polish armies. The lady on the left side. In the whole, Napoleon's war against Russia had a destabilizing effect on the economic situation of Warsaw. But Warsaw's economy could easily be stimulated through accidental and temporary factors. An important stimulating factor was the demand of the army for foodstuff, cloth, linen, leather, cattle, horses, and equipment for the military barracks and the military hospitals. The major retail houses benefited in various ways from the new demands. They provided loans to the government and to the workshop owners, organized the cottage work, and obliged the subcontractors. In this way, they made rapid profits. A large-scale supplier was Samuel Antoni Frankel, who was born in Wrocław in 1773. He had come to Warsaw as a representative of a Berlin bank. He founded his wealth and investment capital by supplying the French armed forces with corn. Besides, he organized the salt delivery and provided loans. Frankel established one of the most important banking houses of Warsaw. In his various enterprises, he cooperated with Jakubowiczowa and her stepson. Frankel was also married to a daughter of Jakubowiczowa. The activities of the Jakubowiczowa clan were typical examples for business activities at that time. They show the tendency of major enterprises to cooperate, unify bank and commercial capital, and form financial dynasties. The constitutional period between 1850 and 1830 was a peaceful period for Warsaw, but still, then the business with delivery to the army reached its climax. Large-scale merchants, financiers, and rich artisans organized the production of cloth for uniforms and a wide range of other goods for the armed forces. As before, this group acted as agents who processed the deliveries to the subcontractors. In the 20s, industry developed. Then the importance of banking grew, and many merchants became influential financiers. Jakubowiczowa expanded her bank, which became the largest in the Polish kingdom. Frankel spread his activities as a financier over the European continent, tying contacts to merchants in Germany, France, London, Netherlands, Petersburg, Vienna, the Baltic cities, and Italy. Through his networks, Frankel also helped the finance minister to receive the credit he needed for the development of the country. Due to Frankel's efforts, a Berlin bank granted a loan of 42 million zlotys to the Polish budget. So Frankel was an early representative of a global player. During the November uprising, the banker initiated a payment from a Berlin bank to the insurgents. However, even this action did not hamper the relations between him and the Russian government. The extraordinary successes of his families lead to the question whether origin and religion played a role in it. It is possible that a certain value system existed. A notarial act from 1828 records a quote from the merchant Esig Schönberg. There he expressed that his share solely consists of intellect, work, and diligence. Perhaps this remark mirrors a Jewish-German approach. In 1826, the salt trader Piotr Steinkeller moved from Krakow to Warsaw. He was attracted to Congress Poland because it offered more potential scope of economic action than Galicia. He was of German origin. His ancestors had been Catholic nobles. During the Reformation, they had moved from Pomerania to Tyrol. From there, they migrated to Vienna, and finally, in the second half of the 18th century, the grandfather of Piotr Steinkeller settled in Krakow. His son, the father of Piotr Steinkeller, dealt with spices and colonial goods. Piotr Steinkeller himself was born in Krakow in 1799. In Vienna, he studied commerce and banking. From the beginning of his career, Steinkeller was an innovative entrepreneur. He expanded the trading house of his father and invested in the zinc mines near Krakow. After moving to Warsaw, Steinkeller appeared as a pioneer in a wide range of industrial branches. His first action was to open a trading house in Ulica Trębacka. With his associate Konstanty Wolicki, Steinkeller organized the transport and trade of salt in Congress Poland, as the Russian authorities leased the monopoly on salt to private entrepreneurs. For the transport of salt, his company organized a flotilla on the Vistula River. This gave Steinkeller the idea to enhance the passenger transport on the Vistula. In 1828, he brought the first steamship from England to Poland. Unfortunately, during the November uprising, his flotilla for the salt transport on the river was destroyed, and his partner Wolicki banished to Siberia. At that time, in the 30s, Steinkeller made an agreement with the Bank Polski, which allowed him to administer the zinc mines and smelting plants in the Dąbrowa Basin. There he invested in the extraction of zinc, and then he was active in the zinc trade on several European markets. But also the zinc business led to severe losses, and Steinkeller ended up highly indebted. In the consequence, the Bank Polski took over nearly all his possessions. In spite of the misfortune, Steinkeller's activities have significantly stimulated the extraction of zinc and of hard coal in the Dąbrowa Basin, which was of long-term value. This is a caricature of Steinkeller. During his business trips to England and France, Steinkeller had noticed the high level of technology and industrialization, and this inspired his further undertakings. So the expansion of the traffic connections in the Polish kingdom became one of his central projects. In 1838, he built up a courier service for mail and passenger transport from Warsaw to Krakow, Posen, and Brześć. The horse-drawn stagecoaches were known as Steinkellerki and circulated in Congress Poland until the beginning of the 20th century. It was also Steinkeller's idea to build a railway line between Warsaw and Vienna. He founded a stock company which launched the project together with Count Tomasz Łobiański. Unfortunately, in 1842, the company went bankrupt due to the immense costs linked with the project. Finally, the railway was accomplished through the Russian government, and in 1845 the Wiedenka started. Due to the connection to Vienna, Warsaw became a major traffic hub in the kingdom, and the construction of the railway led to a new industry. Another success story enjoyed the Austrian family Lilpop, who was Protestant or Catholic. August Lilpop had moved from Graz to Warsaw in the late 18th century. There he had founded a watch company. His great-grandson did not take over this craft. Stanisław Lilpop participated in the technological revolution, which was closely linked with the railway construction and the expansion of the metal industry. In 1854, Stanislav Lilpop bought the machine factory Bracha Evans, which had been founded by the English merchant Thomas Evans and Joseph Morris. In the 60s, Evans Lilpop associated with Wilhelm Rau, a banker of German origin. The firm was specialized in producing all kinds of agricultural machines. It then expanded. The expansion was linked with contracts with Russia. So the uprise started in 1869 when the Russian government ordered 3,000 railway wagons. Severin Löwenstein then joined the company, who had Belgian roots. Lilpop, Rau and Löwenstein was the first stock company in the industrial region of Warsaw. It marked the beginning of a process which led to the increase of stock companies in the metal industry. This is the company Lilpop, Rau and Löwenstein in Vorwischle. In 1877, the Russian government placed an order for railway tracks. The government granted a credit which enabled Lilpop to set up the Warsaw Steelworks in Praga. Since the turn of the century, Lilpop, Rau and Löwenstein also produced ammunition ordered in Petersburg. The company then had become the largest metal factory in Warsaw and the largest producer in the kingdom. The Russian economic journal Viestnik Finansov even suggested that it was one of the most profitable enterprises of the Russian metal industry. The factory also worked during the First World War. In 1917, the workers went on strike, which was an important event in the socialist workers' movement. Many German names occur in the Warsaw metal processing industry, such as Werner, Buch and Hanke. The family of Moritz Bormann, the co-founder of Bormann and Schwede, had immigrated from Saxony. A huge tannery in Ulica Okopowa was owned by Temler and Schwede. Schwede's ancestors had moved to Warsaw from Saxony at the beginning of the 19th century. Besides, existed the brewery of Błażej Haberbusch and Konstanty Schiele. This is the outside, and this is the office. All these companies, as well as many others, whose founders had German roots, were part of the economy of Warsaw and the Polish kingdom. Different aims in life had the publisher Ferdinand Hösik, who was born in Warsaw in 1867. He was writer, historian, and the chief editor of the daily newspaper Kurier Warszawski. His grandfather had been a carpenter and come from a small town in Hessen in Middle Germany. As a journeyman, he sought for work in various towns in that region, and finally he traveled to Warsaw in 1825. There he found employment in a carpenter workshop. He had a son, Ferdinand Wilhelm, who was the father of the publisher. Yes, it's only 1/2 page. The memoirs of the publisher reveal a lot about the side, this is Ferdinand Hösik, about the side-by-side of the Polish and German identity of Ferdinand Wilhelm. He earned his living as a bookseller. This is a bookshop. Throughout his life, he maintained close ties to Poles and Jews, but still perceived his Polish environment with a critical eye. His son, the writer and publisher, considered himself a Pole. So the family Hösik provides another evidence for the thesis of historians that the Warsawian Germans tended to identify themselves with the Polish environment. The historiography also shows that during the 19th century in Warsaw, the number of Protestants and of Germans decreased. One reason, assumingly, was immigration. It is also possible that Warsawians with German roots attached less and little importance to the origin of their ancestors. For example, German Protestant communities increasingly used Polish during liturgy and the meetings. The statistics show that in 1897, only 1.6% of the Warsawians considered German as a native tongue. So most of the entrepreneurs whose ancestors moved from Prussia and Saxony to Warsaw became Warsavians, and their gains remained within the local economy. A contemporary even noted that the Warsaw large-scale industrialists, Lilpop, Schwede, Handke, Spies, were far-sighted and had a wide-ranging notion of economic activity. The contemporary comments that they differed a lot from the industrialists in Lodz, who were totally focused on their personal success, for which they used all means. Therefore, it can be concluded carefully that generally the Warsavian Germans had a positive attitude towards their Polish environment.